Potentially the most impressive game I saw at Summer Games Fest isn't even releasing this year. I've never really been a massive fan of the Monster Hunter series, but after watching the 30-minute gameplay demo from Capcom, I am really unreasonably excited for Monster Hunter Wilds. Alright, so as I mentioned, right, I'm not really like a Monster Hunter fan. I've played maybe like 10 hours of Monster Hunter Worlds back in the day. I just kind of really struggled to connect with the whole hunt thing where you go out and hunt monsters and then go back to base. Like, I've always loved my open world, like exploring sort of games, and I just was like, oh, I want to do more exploring. It's almost like an extraction shooter in a way when you think about it. Like, you're extracting like the monster parts here, like, you're obviously not extracting like looter shooter gear, but it has a very similar like gameplay system, or it used to, I guess. Monster Hunter Wilds is kind of different to that. Like, those systems are still there, except now that there is a massive world, it's about 2 times the size of the world. You don't actually have to go specifically on hunts in that same way for a couple of reasons, actually. One of them being that you can actually explore and find monsters that you want to fight, and then by attacking them, you'll start like a quest to defeat the alpha. And the second I'll go into in a little bit, but we actually saw this in action. Like, we went to base and we geared up a little bit, we made some food, we did all of those typical Monster Hunter things, and then just went out into the world and attacked this specific alpha that I can't remember the name of, but it's the one that I'm showing on screen right now. Now, during this fight, we saw a ton of different systems and mechanics and things at work. Like, one of the ones that was immediately noticeable to me was how interactive the environment is in taking out these creatures. Like, obviously you have your mount that allow you to get around a lot faster, but the demoist used a lot of environmental destruction, like pulling down rocks from the roof and using those sort of elements to interact with the monster to like damage it, to knock it down, to like follow up with big hits. And there's also a wound system that we saw a little bit of. So if you damage a monster a certain amount of times, there'll be like a big red sort of bubble on them on like a specific spot, and if you pop that bubble, you'll do a massive amount of damage. And depending on whether you're using a ranged weapon or a melee weapon, that bubble will be a little bit easier or harder to pop. And we saw both types, really, like using a ranged weapon like a bow gun, or following up with like a big greatsword and like charging up like a massive attack to like smash down and destroy the wound spot. Interestingly, we also saw a lot of traps as well, and you can actually place traps and pick them up. Say if the monster, you destroy while the trap's on the ground or something like that, you'll be able to pick up and like move the traps in alternative ways as well. Our demoist was also trying to get the monster to interact with like other monsters. So we found like this big, like, the dune landworm sort of things. Like, we found one of those that was like fighting the monster that we were trying to kill, and then like a dragon that we saw in one of the trailers. Like, I don't think it's technically called a dragon, but that sort of archetype. We found one of those that was like basically destroying every monster that came near it, and just seeing the way that they interact and how smooth it all looks and dynamic as well as you explore around and these creatures sort of interact with you as a player as well as themselves. It just has a really immersive feel to it that I'm really interested in experiencing for myself when we do actually eventually get our hands on it. It reminded me a little bit of Dragon's Dogma in the way that you have these massive creatures, and Monster Hunter has been known for these massive creatures, but being able to climb them and the way that they interact, a little bit of physicality with the environment and that sort of physics system, I found that it definitely made me think of Dragon's Dogma as the most recent comparison, as I've obviously just finished playing that recently. And creating that distinction between those two, like the Monster Hunter and Dragon's Dogma, in my brain, I was like, oh, I enjoy Dragon's Dogma. This is something that I will definitely like as well. We also saw that the player can like teleport, like fast travel back to their camp and change weapons, like even during fights. They used a summoner to summon 3 NPC companions to like help them fight the alpha monster. Obviously, if say you're playing in co-op or with friends, you'll be able to just summon real people, but just for the purposes of the demo, we summoned some NPC helpers to help with that sort of mission. And we traveled back to camp and grabbed, I think we had a bow gun initially, and then we changed to a greatsword, as well as like a shorter longsword type weapon. And then the demo was also switched to a like 2-hand daggers sort of thing, and was able to like climb on the creature's back and like start stabbing it. That's when it really created that Dragon's Dogma distinction for me, that made me think of that connection between those sort of games and the way you can manipulate the enemies. But the whole combat was just like super impressive. Like, considering that this game is coming out next year, like it's not even coming out this year, it's extremely far along. You often find in a lot of these these preview sessions that we get access to that you guys don't actually see, especially ones that we can't capture our own gameplay, you'll see a lot of elements, like a lot of bugs or like things that just like aren't complete yet. And you always get the spiel about how, you know, this is obviously a build in progress and you know, it's not ready for prime time, etc, etc. But it was super impressive how far along Monster Hunter Wilds seems for a game that's coming out in 2025. Like, you know, there are games that I saw at SGF and around that did not look as complete as Monster Hunter Wilds did. Like, I was just absolutely blown away the whole time I was sitting there watching the demo was play this game. Like, man, I cannot wait to actually play this for myself. And the second thing actually was, once the alpha was defeated, we harvested it, you didn't leave the world immediately and like go back to base. Like, was also mentioned that there will be no loading screens between like going back to like your camp or your base, and like the world is just like open. You'll be able to jump on your mount and like sprint between them. You can pick up items and like manipulate things while you're on your mount as well, so you don't have to get off. But I thought that was really interesting. It creates a lot more immersion and like less taking you out of the experience by having to go through loading screens, as you can go out on these missions on your own and then come back at your own pace or fast travel back. And you can also set up temporary campsites where you'll be able to do all of your typical like resting and switching weapons and that sort of stuff. Like, you'll be able to build these just like out in the world at specific locations where your palicos will just be able to like zoom in quickly, like make these campsites for you. And you can do all of your cooking and everything there. Like, we actually saw like a super in-depth like cooking scene that again made me just think of Dragon's Dogma 2, like how we had the cooking scene there where, you know, obviously you've seen the food go across the screen. You're like, damn, that food looks great, right? Like, it's basically a very similar thing here, which Monster Hunter has done before, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, I'm not making it seem like that just came from Dragon's Dogma, but just because it was so fresh in my mind, it made me think of that a lot while we were watching this demo. And it's not strictly like an open world sort of experience, but it's definitely like a larger open zone type thing. Like, I'm not exactly sure how they're categorizing it, but we did see the demo was like bring up the map, and you've got a ton of like different icons on the map, as well as just different things happening in the world. It's not just like going out and fighting the monsters in this big open environment. Like, the demo was brought up like binoculars and like zoomed in to show like some of the detail of like monsters growing up and like eggs. And funnily enough, when they did that, like, we actually got attacked by some monster that just like came out of nowhere and like took down the player. It was kind of funny, but you know, there's a lot of detail that's going into the world and the interactivity of the different monsters and like their environments, plus the weather system and how that's going to come into play. Like, different monsters will be out during different times of the day. It was mentioned that there's like an abundance period where you'll see like more herbivores and those more passive monsters, as well as like a lightning time, or I can't remember the specific name for it, but you know, when that dragon archetype enemy would be around, as well as more aggressive monsters depending on the time and the weather, just to add to those more emergent elements that can come into play, like when you're fighting these alphas and these other monsters as well, or depending on what you're looking for. It's like certain monsters might appear during certain weather or like more frequently, that sort of thing. It was quite interesting to see just all of these elements working together, right? Like, not only the monsters, but the world and the weather and the different weapon types. Like, there were 14 different weapon types. We didn't get to see all of them. Like, we only saw the ones that I mentioned before, but we were told there's going to be 14 different types. And I'm just really interested in Monster Hunter Wilds, right? Like, I've never really been super interested in the Monster Hunter series, but I was just so impressed by everything that I saw, and it really made me want to play Monster Hunter Wilds. And you know, this video is pretty unscripted. I literally just have a couple of notes and have hit record, so I hope I've been at least coherent and told you guys some new and interesting information about Monster Hunter Wilds. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like, are you excited for Monster Hunter Wilds? You know, are you going to be picking this up next year? It's definitely one that's 100% on my radar now. Like, super impressed by what I saw. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.